Signore e signori, buonasera, benvenuti alla Casa Italiana zerilli-marimò della New York University. We are delighted to host this evening's event that is a collaborative effort between the Department of Economics here at New York University and the New York Delegation of the Banca d'Italia. I was speaking before with our guest, and I was saying that probably the Banca d'Italia features the only real think tank that exists in Italy. There is no such a tradition of think tanks as you have here that belong to different organizations or foundations, either private or public. So really Banca d'Italia, through its legendary Centro Studi, that I just learned changed its name, throughout the decades, especially after World War II, provided a kind of research and reflection on not only on the economy of the country, but on a variety of other aspects that are very closely connected to it. My job tonight is very easy because I just have to introduce a colleague that will in turn introduce you to our speaker tonight. And just since my next guest is a professor of economics here at New York University, I just want to underline the very significant presence of Italian economists in the Department of Economics here. And for 3 terms, the chair of the Department of Economics at NYU, that as you know is one of the best in the country, was Italian. So without further ado, I would like to please ask you to welcome Professor Alberto Bisin. Thank you.
Thank you. My job will be even easier. Just a second. I really want to thank Casa Italiana for hosting this event. It doesn't, it's not that easy typically to talk about economics outside of, the departments where research is done. It's hard. We'll see. Matteo will have a really hard time. These are relatively complicated concepts which that he's going to talk about, which require a lot of data analysis, which gets more and more sophisticated over the years. It's very important. In Italy, we're seeing a debate, an economic debate, which is very biased and often, very superficial, I would say. And it's important to try and throw some sense into it. As Stefano was saying, the Bank of Italy has been doing this forever. The Servizio Studi is, it's one of the great institutions in the country, and it's kept. Bank of Italy, of course, a lot of the job that the bank has been doing over after the Second World War went to the European Central Bank, but the Bank of Italy still remains this core institution where good research in economics is done, applied research in economics is done. Matteo is a great example. So we are the Department of Economics at NYU and the department at Stern at the business school. We're very happy to do this. We've done it some time ago, and we're happy to do it again. And so, thanks to Casa Italiana. I hope you enjoyed.
Okay, thanks a lot. Thanks for being here this afternoon, and thanks to Casa Italiana, to NYU, for inviting me here to present, to make this presentation. What is this presentation about? This is a presentation that in some slide you, if you are not economist, might find sort of technical, too technical, but my aim here, the challenge is that I will try to make it easy. So you will tell me at the end if I succeeded. We are talking about growth in Italy, productivity growth in particular, and I will explain you why we focus on productivity in a couple of slides. And this presentation is based on a very long paper we are finalizing with all the authors you see at the bottom here. Why so many authors? Because this paper is not the typical economic paper in which you have one single idea, you want to prove that that idea is wrong or right. actually, right? But this is a position paper. This is a paper that goes through all the possible structural features of the Italian economy with the idea of understanding what's going on. What are the weaknesses, what are the strengths, and what are the policies that should be made to have a stronger growth in Italy. So why do we talk about productivity? In a second I will give you a definition of productivity, but here you see 3 citations. The first one from global to Italy. This is the idea of the 3 citations. The first one is by Chad Jones, Stanford University, in the Sintra Forum on Central Banking, which is the Jackson Hole, the European Jackson Hole meeting of central bankers. He claimed that the most remarkable fact about economic growth worldwide is the slowdown in productivity growth. And he claims that this is a global phenomenon. The idea that productivity is at the center of the debate is also, and especially in the euro area, Mario Draghi a week ago, while saying happily that the euro area economy started growing again, he said, well, there is a productivity growth problem. And this productivity growth problem has to be taken seriously, because if it persists, the future prosperity and the cohesion of the euro area are at risk. So 2 important things, the prosperity of people and the cohesion of the euro area. Going to Italy, the governor of the Bank of Italy, Ignazio Visco, just 1 month ago, basically said the same concept. Obviously, as I will show you in a while, for Italy, the productivity issue is even more serious than for the euro area on average. Why productivity is relevant? One reason, the first reason I already told you, it is related to the real income, to the standard of living of people in a nation, but it has a stronger impact. If you are more productive, if you are more efficient in producing something, your prices are lower, and this is good for disposable income of real disposable income of households. The real exchange rate allows you to be more competitive, or you are better able to produce over the long run and therefore to be rich. You have more fiscal space. If you are more productive, then there is a kind of very technical thing in Europe. The structural deficit is a boring definition saying that if you are more productive, you have more fiscal space. If you get into a recession, you can use fiscal policy to try to get out of the recession. So productivity is very important. So the presentation will have some data, then we go directly to the analysis of the Italian data, and where we distinguish the channels driving productivity growth from the determinants. And obviously the determinants are the ones that will take us to talk about policy, the structural reforms, for those of you that follow the debate within the euro area. The structural reforms word is always on the newspaper. And so we try to answer the very difficult question, what are the policy priorities? As Alberto was saying before, obviously the debate is about everything. Everything seems to be a policy priority in a country, in the euro area. Now here the exercise is to try to understand what is really important and what is probably less important. Obviously, your opinion will be important from your different perspective. If you have, I guess, for sure you have a different perspective from mine. So the data. This is a graph showing that there is a productivity problem around the world. What is productivity? This is labor productivity. What does it mean? It means how much value added a single worker can produce in a given country. Okay? The more the value added the worker can produce, the more efficient, the more productive is that country. And there is a debate, the Chad Jones debate, on the secular stagnation. There is a tendency in terms of productivity going down all over the world. There are many reasons. There is a strong debate. I don't have time to go in that debate, but there are somebody saying that it's a technology issue. So these are the pessimists, but then there are optimists saying, okay, come on, technology is everywhere. Technology is improving everywhere. So let's go on, but just to let you know that the issue is very hotly debated across the world. This is the first number. This is a table that tries to make the point that productivity is a real issue for Italy. What is this table about? Look at the below. GDP. This is we're looking at the GDP growth in a country. GDP growth in a country, the amount of goods a country is able to produce depend on the last term. You see the demographics saying that if you have more people in the country that is capable of working, then if they can work, obviously you produce more. But they can work, but probably they're not able to find the work. And though this is the term in the middle. So the labor market functioning, if people work and how much they work, you see the hours worked, implies that you produce more. Taking the labor input, then you have the efficiency. You have the workers there, but those workers can be less or more productive, depending on how the firms organize this type of work. So technology, organization, all these things affect the efficiency, which is the productivity we are looking at. Okay, if you look at the numbers, the productivity, okay, no problem. But if you look at the productivity, which is this column, or this column, or this column, don't worry about the different definition, but these are three different definitions of productivity. If you look at the numbers, the country with the worst performance is always Italy. And that is true in any of the sub-periods that are analyzed in this table. We take from 1995, so before the euro, after the collapse of the lira in 92, 93, and so on. But you see all the period here, the three sub-periods before the crisis, the recent crisis, and the recent recovery. Italy is always the country with the worst performance in terms of productivity. That's why we need to talk about productivity in Italy. So let's try to make a step forward and say, okay, but the Italian economy is obviously a complex economy. There are many things within the Italian economy. So let's try to understand where the problem is. The first cut of the data that is particularly useful is distinguishing between manufacturing and services. If you look at manufacturing, you see that Italy is always below. So this is the first message to bring home. Italy is always below. But if you look at the data more carefully, you see that since 2003, there has been an improvement in manufacturing. And more importantly, since 2009, productivity growth in the manufacturing sector in Italy performed exactly as productivity in the other countries, the other three main euro area countries. So this is the first message I want you to take home. The second one is, let's say, on the negative side. If you look at the private services, so obviously not firms that are competing for tradable goods in global markets, they do not export or import, most of them, you see that the performance of productivity is always flat. It's flat, it's worse than the other countries, no signs of recovery, both in absolute and relative terms. No? Neither over time, nor with respect to the other countries. So we have a first important difference. The second important difference is firm size. This is going to be the variable that I will cite many times during my presentation. What is this? This is the labor productivity in the four countries, again, France, Germany, Italy, and Spain, but divided for different type of firms. You see that Italy, in this case, and Spain, have a very low productivity as compared to the other countries among the small firms, the micro firms. These are micro firms, 1-9 workers, okay, very small firms. When you go to the other categories, you see that the Italian performance is not that bad. Okay, so there is a clear issue here related to the fact that we have small firms that are very low productive. And why is this a problem? Because this is in Italian, it's taken from ISTAT, from the National Statistical Institute, but this is the structure of the Italian economy. Let me explain what this graph is telling us. All the firms of the country are divided according to two dimensions. The first one is their export propensity, their propensity to export. I mean, how much of their turnover, of their sales are exported, which fraction, which proportion, and then their size. And for each of these combination of things, you see the contribution in terms of value added. So, as the title says, a very polarized productive structure with many small firms here, very small firms that do not export, very small, the micro firms I showed you before that produce a great part of the value added of the Italian economy, and then some others that are larger, exporting and so on, that do this second part. So two mountains, nothing in between. Okay? So very polarized productive structure. So keep it in mind, and we will come back to this in a while. So these are the data. So manufacturing versus services, small firms versus medium and large firms. Now let's try to take this measure of productivity, and I will propose you a second statistical decomposition that I will explain to you in a while, which allows us to identify the channels through which productivity may grow or not grow. What is this? There are some economists here, so this is the, I don't know if you know, the dynamic only takes the composition, but this is very simple. Do you mind if I walk around? So This is the aggregate productivity growth of the Italian economy. Okay, see negative numbers during the crisis. Okay, this aggregate productivity growth has been decomposed in two big terms. The first one is related to the surviving firms. I mean, there are firms that are on the market in every year, and these surviving firms can, I mean, the productivity, the contribution of surviving firms to aggregate productivity growth can come from two channels in turn. The first one is the productivity growth of the single firm. I mean, every firm can make innovation, technology adoption, become more efficient, or unfortunately in some cases less efficient if there is a collapse in trade, as like it happens in 2008, 2009, they don't sell their product, but they keep the workers, so the value added goes down, the workers remain there, the productivity goes down, which is a kind of obvious thing. But the term that is very interesting is this reallocation. What is reallocation? If you have two countries and two firms, let's say, with the same level of productivity, firm A with a higher productivity than firm B, the aggregate performance of this country can be different if I put more resources, more capital and labor on the best firms. Okay? The firms have the same productivity, but they simply invest more resources on the best firms, on the most efficient firms. Automatically, on average, this brings up the productivity of a country. So this is the reallocation. As you can see, the reallocation has positive coefficient. Now, the only positive coefficient you see in this table. So this is saying that in the Italian economy, even before the crisis, but more strongly during the crisis, there has been a movement of capital and labor towards the best firms. Okay, this is something you want to happen in a country. You don't want to have your capital and labor trapped in the firms that are not efficient, in not efficient uses or not efficient sectors. Okay. Then there is the second piece is the firm demographics, the entry and exit. A productive system has firms that enter, firms that exit continuously, no? And as you can see, the contribution of this part is very low in Italy. Not much, I mean, something happens, but if you look at the net, it's not really, somebody who lives in the United States knows that most of the dynamic of a system comes from new firm entering, no? It was Facebook, Google, and so on, maybe Uber, and so on. That it must be dynamics in the system that comes from new entrepreneurs and new firms. In Italy, this is not true. And indeed, two colleagues of mine studied this phenomenon. And basically, they compared Italy to the US. There is a lot of literature on the US. And basically, they concluded that what is really strange in the Italian economy is that the new firms entering the market, they enter smaller than the average US firms. They grow at lower rates for a lower number of years. So it's like saying you are a baby and you grow up for 2 years at a very low rate. I guess that when you are 18, you are pretty small. And this is exactly the result of what happens in the Italian economy. So this up or out dynamics is called. In Italy, seems not working very well. It became even worse during the crisis when the credit crunch obviously hit the new entrepreneurs entering the market. But then later on, after a very long recession, the exit rate increased, and the productivity, low productive firms exited the market. And this is positive. I'm sorry for the entrepreneurs who were forced to close, but this is positive for the functioning of the system. So now let's go to the most interesting part, which will take us to talk about policy, structural reforms. So far we look at the productivity growth and we'll distinguish the three channels. I hope you got the channels. So the increase of productivity of efficiency within the single firm, the reallocation that I told you before, and the entry and exit. These are the three channels we have to keep in mind. These three channels depends on many things. Some of these things are internal to the firm. It's the firm that chooses innovation, human capital, which workers to hire, low skilled, high skilled, and so on. The ownership, the management of the firm. So these are factors that are internal to the firm. Then there are factors that are external to the firm, that are related to the institution, to the functioning of the markets in a given country. So labor market, the financial market, the competition, the regulation, all the rules, the insolvency regime, this is very important in Italy, that talks to the exit. No? The insolvency regime talks to the exit. And then the business environment in general, how easy is to open up, start up a new firm in Italy. It depends on the rules, on the business environment, and where business environment is a very general concept, and we'll get to that. So let's start from the internal. What do we know? So what I'm doing now, until the end, is just to take all the evidence that is being produced at the Bank of Italy, but not only, on the Italian economy, on the single factor to understand if there is a problem and what is the problem. Okay? I'm using the economics literature to do this type of exercise. So this is, for economists, this is kind of obvious. Productivity is related to innovation and technology. If you innovate your processes, your product, your organization, if you adopt new technology, you as a firm become more productive. And so there are clearly efficiency and productivity are synonyms. I'm using the two words in the same way. Efficiency gains at the firm level. No? You do R&D, research and development expenditure. You buy new machinery that are more efficient than the previous machinery, and so on, and speed, availability, all these things. Then obviously, this is the within part. But also, when you have a system with a lot of innovation, you expect that the innovative firms kill the other firms, the low-efficient firms, and so you have this reallocation, this creative destruction mechanism working and sustaining productivity growth. Last but not least, most of the innovation is typically done by startup firms. So innovation and entry are two concepts that are strictly related. This is the typical statement we read in reports on the innovation within Europe. The European Union may write an annual report and try to use all these indicators and to rank the countries according to the intensity of innovation. And Italy comes out as a moderate innovator. It's not top of the list, it's not the last one, is somehow in the middle. So what's going on behind this moderate innovation? First of all, firm size matters again. In any country, the propensity to innovate grows with size. Why is that? Innovating requires to pay costs, and if you are very small, probably you don't have access to finance easily, or you don't have your own resources, and so what happens is typically if you have many large firms, probably you are more innovative as a country than if you have, especially like us, very small firms. But this is clearly not enough. It's not just a fact related to firm size. Because if you look at this graph, independently of firm size, Italy is lagging behind dramatically, okay? So there must be something else. Indeed, when we look at the polarization I told you before of the productive structure of the Italian economy, you see that on one side there are few, maybe we could count them, but let's say few, highly innovative, productive, internationalized firms that belong to the productivity frontier. The OECD wrote a report trying to identify the global player, the firms that are at the productivity frontier, the more efficient firm. In Italy, the most efficient firm in Italy has some firms there in the productivity frontier, but they are quite a few. And then there is this great majority of firms lagging behind with low innovation, low internationalization, low efficiency, and so on. A result like this could depend on two elements. On one side, the question is probably, is it a problem of returns to innovation? That is, if an Italian firms make an innovation, the returns from that innovation are low, or is it a problem of costs? They don't make the innovation to start with because it's too expensive. If they made it, then the return to innovation is exactly as in the US, Germany, and France. According to this study, the problem is with the costs, which makes sense, because again, it means that there are too many firms that are small and are not able to bear the cost to undertake innovative projects. The second variable is human capital. Obviously, human capital has a strong complementarity, is strongly related to innovation and technology, especially in the era where we live. The digital age, obviously. We can imagine that have skilled workers makes a significant difference. There is macro and micro evidence, where macro, looking at country data or looking at firms, saying that if you have higher level of human capital, more skilled workers, and so on. You grow more. The output per capita output growth is higher. The firm's productivity is higher. There are many reasons for doing that. When we look at Italy, unfortunately, again, there is a negative, result. Quantitative and qualitative shortage of human capital with respect to the other advanced countries. This is the result. There are some numbers here. 60% of population between 25 and 64 years completed upper secondary education. 18% at all the tertiary level degree. The two numbers in the European average are 79 and 32. And when I say European average, I mean that there you have Poland and so all the other countries. The gap is not due to the older generation. It's obvious that, the younger generation go to school more than the older generation. This is not the case. It is the case, but this is not enough to close the gap. If you just look at the same number, focusing on the population 25, 34 years old, again, there is a gap with respect to the EU average. Last but not least, if you take the adult, and there is here a peer survey by OECD, they look at the skills of the adult, and then Italy ranks last in language skill and third to last in numeracy among OECD countries. So there is a clear problem with human capital. But we don't want to conclude that this problem is due to the fact that people don't go to school or the school system is not efficient. The problem could be more complex. There are demand and supply factors. The supply being the supply of people, educated people. The demand is that on the other side there must be firms that demand for these skills, okay? And obviously if you have a system, okay, this is the supply channel. I am a firm. Should I invest in new technology and do innovation? Depends. If I can find the workers out there that use the technology and do the innovation, maybe I do it. If I don't find the workers, I'm not gonna do it. So this is the supply problem. If the universities or the school do not provide me with workers that are capable of adopting new technology and so on, so as a firm I decide not to adopt new technology. This is supply channel that goes from the education system to the firm system. But there is the other way around. It could be that firms are specialized in low-skilled production, they are very small, they do not demand skilled workers, they do not need skilled workers, and so as a result they don't pay for skills. If they don't pay for skills, as a single person I don't have strong incentives to invest in education, obviously, because if I invest in education nobody's going to hire me and pay me for what I learn, and so this could be a bad equilibrium. On the top of that, there is also the labor market. Whenever you have a supply of skilled workers and a firm demanding skilled workers, the labor market should be able to make them find each other, to match the skill. This paper finds that there is a vicious circle between the demand and the supply, where the supply is important, so there is a problem with the education system, and this bad equilibrium is made worse by the functioning of the labor market, and I will get to that in a second. Third element, ownership and management. Chad Syverson is Chicago and is one of, I would say, is an expert of productivity, definitely an expert of productivity. He claims that if you look at the dispersion in productivity across firms and after controlling, accounting for differences in the stock and quality of capital and labor, then there is something that is still unexplained. So we need to look for something else. There is something that is not in the skill of the worker or not in the quality of the capital used in the technology that explain these differences. So the first element that comes to, I would say, an economist's mind is to say, okay, but behind, the efficiency of a firm is done by the owners and the managers. The people that decide how to combine the capital and labor and organize the firm. So they make the organizational innovation, the organizational choice. Indeed, there has been a work by these economists from Stanford and London School of Economics. They carry out a comprehensive study on managerial practices with the help of McKinsey. And they show that what McKinsey defined as better management practices are indeed strongly associated with high productivity. So there is, a ranking in the way a firm should be managed, good management or bad management, and this is important for productivity. Then they do a step forward and say, okay, but let's look at the distribution of these managerial practices across different types of firms, and they conclude that family firms with family CEO, that is a firm that is heavily based on the family, is less efficient than the other firms, than the average. So why is this important for Italy? What is this? This is the share of firms. This is a survey on manufacturing firms with more than 10 employees. So it means that the 19 firms I showed you before are not here, okay? That are probably the least efficient firms in the country, but we don't have it here. So this is family ownership. What is the percentage of firms that are owned by a family? Very high in every country. Look, there is UK, there is no Spain here, there is UK, okay? So UK, 80%. Germany and Italy close to 85, 90. So Germany and Italy more owned than the other countries, but the numbers are huge in all countries. Let's make a step into the management. This is ownership. Let's go to the management. This is the percentage of firms with a CEO that comes from the family, the same family that owned the firms. And here you start seeing that Germany and Italy are peculiar in a sense, remain with high values with respect to France and UK. But where Italy is unbelievably, alone is in the third column. And there was a question in the survey say, can you tell me if all your managers come from the family? Okay, so this is a firm that is totally family managed, Okay, and you see that we are the only one. Why is it wrong? Some literature here. This is on ownership. I mean, if you have too much family ownership, probably given the combination between the family, the capital of the family, the wealth of the family and the wealth of the firm, the attitude of the entrepreneur is more risk averse in a sense. So whenever you need some big change or undertake risky project, change the technologies, go internationalize your activity and so on, this is risk. And if you are a family firm, probably you tend not to do, obviously this is, I'm generalizing, obviously there are excellent family firms in any country and in Italy too, but this is on average. But the problem is here. Let's move to the management. There is a recent paper by Pellegrino and Zingales, and they claim that there is a problem in the managerial selection in the country, which is due to the lack of meritocracy, they say, and the excessive dose of familyism. So you select the wrong manager. When you select the wrong managers, the result is that there is a negative impact in the development of ICT intensive sector. So whenever there is too much risk, this type of firms don't take it, okay? In a paper we did a few years ago, we look at the correlation between this characteristic and innovation, finding the very strong correlation, just the correlation, doesn't mean that this implies low innovation, but this is what we find looking at the numbers. So there is an issue, okay, with family management. Now we move to the external factors, and probably this is, I would say, even more interesting because now we talk about policy. We can talk about policies, the levers that the government can move to change things. I guess that changing the management structure of a firm is going to be difficult, but here we move and talk about something that is, labor market, regulation, all stuff that the government can change. Let's start from the labor market. There is a rich literature in economics saying that different dimensions of the labor market are important for productivity and growth. The first dimension that is typically hotly debated is the employment protection legislation. I mean, the rules governing the dismissal rules. When you fire a worker, what happens? Okay? And obviously, if the regulation is too restrictive, the firms have no incentive to hire people, to becoming too large, because if something goes wrong, you have to fire a worker, and then you have to pay a high cost face high uncertainty, go in front of a judge, and probably the judge takes 10 years and so on. And obviously this reduces the allocative efficiency, reduces the incentive of firms to undertake innovative and risky projects again. Then there is a system of unemployment benefits. Whenever a worker is fired, are we going to give something to this worker? Nothing, much, little. Obviously, there is a literature saying, if you want to have the allocative efficiency work smoothly, so if a worker accepts to be dismissed, if he knows that for a while, for the time he needs to find a new job, he has some income support coming from the state. Okay? So if the unemployment benefit system is well designed, universal, and so on, then allocative efficiency, which is the reallocation. Allocative efficiency is the reallocation term, as I was saying before in the table I showed you at the beginning. So the ability to move resources in the right way, this improves the situation, especially when the unemployment benefit system that is also called the passive labor market policy are well coordinated with the active labor market policies. What are the active labor market policies? Are all those private and public service agencies that help workers to retrain, to find a new work, and so on. So this is the typically, I simplify things a lot, but these are the three lenses through which we can analyze the labor market of a country. How is the Italian labor market along this dimension? Our claim is that the two reforms we had in 2012, the Fornero reform, and in 2015, the Jobs Act, improved significantly the Italian labor market. On the dismissal rule, there is more flexibility, lower probability of restatement of the work in case of unjust dismissal, more certainty on firms' dismissal cost. In other terms, less discretion of the judge. And so this is a positive thing that allows firms to manage labor in a more flexible way. Actually, there is a study showing that indeed the Jobs Act had the effect of reduced labor market duality, in a sense that firms were trying to avoid the judge, let's say, hiring temporary work instead of permanent workers, no? Because the temporary work has obviously a deadline, so you can change the worker. With the permanent worker, you have problems. So the Jobs Act changed the nature of the permanent contract, and firms reacted positively, hiring people with permanent contracts. We have now more universal and generous unemployment benefits. We are still ongoing the reform of the active labor market policy, so the reform is not complete, but our assessment is a positive assessment. This on the labor market rules. Obviously, the labor market is another piece, which is the bargaining system. This is the structure. Maybe you might want to read it on your own, but the Italian bargaining system, the industrial relations so-called, is based on three pillars. The first one is a sort of general one that set the general rules. Then this is the important one. The contracts, the wages, and the rules of the game are set at the national sector-wide level. So there are Confindustria and the unions meeting, and for a given sector, if Federchimica and the unions meeting, and for the chemical sector, they decide the work organization, they decide deregulation, they decide the minimum wage, okay, for every sector. The minimum wage set at the sectoral level in Italy applies to almost 100% of employees and cover almost 90% of their wages. So it's the relevant part of the system. The game is played here. Then we have some, third level, local, firm, or area level contracts where, there are no big scope of changing things. For example, in terms of wages, the only thing you can do is to give more money to the worker, not less money to the worker. So this is a floor, this is a minimum wage. Why am I talking about that? Because there is a huge debate. If you read the report by the OECD, the ECB, the European Commission, the IMF, they all say that in Italy we have to reform the bargaining system. The problem is here. This is the productivity. No? This is very flat, and these are wages. You don't want a country in which workers are paid more, from competitiveness reason. You are not competitive if you pay worker more than what they produce. Okay? And why do you pay worker more? These are two lines. This is the wages, the de facto wages, what the people earn. And this is the contractual wages. The wages I showed you before, the one that come out from the industrial relation. And the two move together. So, for the reason I told you before, 100% of workers are covered by contractual wages, and the contractual wages make 90% of the wages. So, there is no margin to do anything different, right? And so, the basic idea is that if you want to get these two lines closer, we have to act on the bargaining system. And possibly we have to move to a firm level bargaining system, allowing firm to opt out if the wage set at the sectoral level is too high. And all this will trigger a sort of positive adjustment. Low productive firms can pay lower wages and therefore close the gap between wage and productivity. They can give incentives to workers to become more productive. So there are a series of positive effects from a change in the current, bargaining system. So this is about labor. Now we move to capital. And so we need to talk about finance. No? The financial markets are giving capital to the firms. There is a huge literature on the importance of finance for growth. Obviously, if you choose capital, pay worker, buy a new technology, innovate, export, you need finance, or all these activity need finance. These are the firm level, but there is more. I mean, the banking system or the financial system, in choosing which project to finance, are implicitly affecting the reallocation. No? The term I was saying before, if they decide to give money to low productive firms, the system and the productivity growth of the system is going to suffer. If they are able to identify the most productive firms, that is better. So the allocation is related to the financial and banking system. In the case of Italy, we have to talk about bank credit, because most of the finance comes from the banks. The financial system out of the banking system is not really developed, and we have evidence that obviously credit favors productivity growth. When we had the credit crunch, there was a collapse in investment and innovation. Obviously, a system that with too high reliance on banking, on bank credit, is bad for innovative projects. You cannot imagine that the banks enter into the market for new project where there is no collateral, you don't know the entrepreneur, and so on. So you need something else. So a problem in the Italian economy is the absence of financial system except the banking system. Let me go with some more detail on the allocation, or misallocation issue. There is a very influential paper by Gopinath and co-authors saying that after the euro, what happened in the euro area was a decrease in lower interest rates. So the decrease in lower interest rate has been accompanied by an increase in the credit growth, a lot of credit available to firms. According to the Gopinath thesis, what happened is that this capital went to the wrong sectors and firms. A typical example is construction sectors in Spain. Too much credit to construction firms, then the crisis came and Spain collapsed. In the paper, they say, but this applies to Italy too. The paper is on Spain, but this applies to Italy too, they say. So this is an important point. I mean, is the Italian economy a weak economy because there is a banking sector out there that gives the resources, give capital, give money to the wrong firms? This is a big question. This is very important. We don't know the answer before the crisis. We are working on that. But we look at what happened during the crisis, because again, starting with the idea that the Italian banking system is not really capable of allocating the resources, some people said, during the crisis there were troubled Italian banks with low capital ratio, so we had banks with significant problems. So probably these banks have an incentives to do zombie lending. What is zombie lending? There are zombie firms out there, okay? Firms that should die because they are not productive. But if they die as a bank, I have to record a non-performing loan, okay? I don't want to do that because the non-performing loan to me is a problem. So what I do is to give money to these firms to keep them alive. But they are not productive, but I want to keep them alive because this is the only way to save my balance sheet. So this, Schivardi said in Tabellini asked, has there been zombie lending by troubled Italian banks during the crisis? And the answer is yes, there has been some zombie lending. In some cases, you see that banks with low capital are less likely to reduce credit to zombie firms. And this had an effect on healthy firms, because obviously the point is that I want to keep a zombie firm alive, and this is fine because this is employment, people are working in the firm, so I'm happy about that. But obviously I'm not happy about that if this choice damages another healthy and good firms, okay? They find something, but at the end of the day, the message of the paper is, but it's irrelevant. We are talking about nothing. These zombie firms are really few. Their relevance in the economy is really small. So the negative impact on the aggregate is basically irrelevant. I think this is very important because if you read the newspapers and the debate, the political debate, there is the idea at the European level, there is the idea that zombie lending is an important phenomenon, has been an important phenomenon for Italy. This is the zombie lending by, troubled Italian banks. If you look at the system in general, you see what you would expect, that when the crisis comes, banks are more able, tends to give money to firms that have greater potential. So just the opposite happened at the aggregate level. So reallocation and improved thanks to the credit crunch. Again, it's sad to say because some firms exited, but positive effect on the Italian economy. So this is about finance. Now we move to competition. I want to stay on this slide no more than 1 minute. Competition has many dimensions. The first one and the most important one is that competition is related to globalization. For example, the entry of China into the WTO completely changed the competitive environment for the manufacturing firms of all countries, in particular of Italy, that are specialized in products that are, too similar to what China produces. So there is a huge literature out there saying whenever there is an increase in trade, in international trade, you have positive effects on the productivity of your system because competition forces firms to improve. Competition improves the allocation of resources. Trade means larger markets, and when the markets are larger, I can make risky investment in innovation, innovation and productivity because I know that I can get a return on a larger market. Trade means that I can buy higher quality inputs. If I buy higher quality inputs, very likely my outputs are going to be higher quality, and so this is good. And there is evidence that this happened in Italy too. So the only thing that I'm interested in is this. I showed you at the beginning that manufacturing performed better than services. Well, I think that most of that is due to the fact that the manufacturing firms are exposed to global competitive pressure, while service firms are closed. Not all of them, but most of them. So this is the message. But in terms of policy, it's more important to talk about other dimensions that affect competition. The regulation of a country is affecting competition. With the rules you establish as a government in terms of firm entry, firm activity, and so on, you decide whether incumbent firms are protected from competition, from competitive pressure from new firms, coming from new firms. So this is regulation. So let's start from the regulation of entry. Regulation of entry, what does it mean? It means that if I want to start up a new firm, then I have probably some rules that govern how can I establish the legal entity. There are some rules different in the country, and then whenever I said Bugamelli, SPA is alive, then I have to ask for authorization, permits, for a new plant, to build something, and so on. These rules can have a monetary or a time nature. What do I mean? Maybe I have to pay something, okay? Could be a lot, or it could be, for any of this dimension I could pay, or I waste time because I have to go to a public, to follow the bureaucracy, and I go there and go there, I have to pay something, to fill a form and so on. So money versus time. If you look at the graph, these are the registration costs and these are the startup costs. Italy is not that bad in terms of time to open up a firm, to register a firm. There are some higher costs. But when you go to the startup costs that are much more important than the registration costs, so we should talk only about the startup costs. These are basically irrelevant with respect to the startup costs. The time is really important. It takes a lot of time to get authorization, permits, and so on. Also, some money, but the point is the time. So here you see three papers that try to look at this different aspect and see if they are relevant. In the first one, this is a study look at the entry rates of limited liability companies in Italy across provinces where the regulatory burden is different. And they find that when the regulatory burden is lower, then you have the entry of more firms. So exactly what you would expect. There was a reform in Italy in 2010, and this reform is called the Sportello Unico, in English, one-stop shop. And the idea is that in each municipality there is an office, a guy, that helps the firm to open up the firm, okay, to start with the permits, authorization, and so on. The reform, this paper shows that the reform had a positive effect on entry rates and survivorship. Also survivors, you entry, but you are better able to remain into the market only just for sole proprietor firms, not big firms. The big firms obviously have no problem to do that. But what I think is very interesting is this story. This is a model and a model of the time and monetary costs. And the model says something that I find very interesting, which is, look, having time or monetary cost is not indifferent. There is a selection mechanism behind it. If you have monetary cost, probably the best entrepreneurs, those who know that they have very good idea, very productive in the future, they are willing to pay for the monetary cost. Probably because there will be, a bank that is willing to lend him or lender credit, and so no problem with that. But when the costs are time costs, just the opposite happens. Only those entrepreneurs who have, nothing to do, they have time to go, to the office, to the public office, stay there for hours, take the ticket and then move there and go to Sportello 18 and then Sportello 16. These guys, so there is a negative selection of entrepreneurs. So we are in a world, the Italian world, in which the predominance of time cost causes a negative selection. So the entrepreneurs are worse than they would be without such cost. Then there is an estimate, you take this number, I don't know, the experts are there. That was about entry, but it's not only that. Regulation affect, all the activities of firms, not only entry. So there is a tendency in the country to protect incumbents, to give incumbents some sort of advantage with respect to new firms. And this is negative, obviously, if the protection is too restrictive, is too high for a locative efficiency entry. And there is plenty of evidence showing that this is the case. I would like just to go through this. I don't know if you remember the Bersani reform of the retail sector in 1998. At some point in the retail sector, they said, okay, you can open up a big supermarket wherever you want, okay? But what happened is that the Bersani reform left the decision to the single regions. So there are some regions that decided to liberalize, and some other regions that decided not to liberalize, obviously because behind there was the small shop, the small retailers saying, okay, come on, if the big supermarket comes, I have to close, my family is working there, and so on. And so they exploit the difference between Abruzzo and Marche. Marche liberalized a lot, Abruzzo didn't liberalize. They look at the provinces that were, on the border between Abruzzo and Marche, and they find that the liberalization raised productivity, raised employment, reduced prices, margins and prices. Prices means, guys, what we pay at the supermarket. So this is a positive effect in terms of, consumer welfare. So this is what happened. On the product market regulation, a long reform process in Italy. This is the Bersani reform and other reforms, the network, the telecommunication, all the telecommunication operators we have now, they come from here, okay, from this phase. Then we have a second, le lenzuolate di Bersani in 2006-2007, and then the Cresci Italia by Monti in 2011. They touched, we have no time to go through this, but they touch many different sectors, trying to liberalize those sectors, and the impact was significant. So Italy did a lot. This is the message I want you to take home. Italy did a lot in terms of liberalization of markets. This was the Italian position in 1998. This is the Italian position in 2013. So here you see Germany, Austria, New Zealand, Denmark, Australia, Austria, United Kingdom, Netherlands. So we are there, okay? And this is the big improvements we had in some sector, electricity, gas, telecom. So big improvement. The reforms had a big impact in liberalizing the sector, the service sector in Italy. Having said that, there are still some sectors that are more protected, something the professional services, but mostly transportation, so local public services, you imagine all the transportation in the cities, and the retail sector, because the Bersani reform basically failed over time, because at some point all the regions stepped back, and so at the end you see that we are still down there, very, very restrictive. So let's change argument again, and this is the insolvency regime. Basically, legge fallimentare, bankruptcy law. A sound insolvency regime ensures better allocation of resources. Sorry, this word is always there, but I mean, because the basic idea is that if you have a good system that controls the exit of the firms and the exit of the right firms, then you have a better allocation of resources, a more efficient use of inputs within the firm, the entry of innovative firms, because firms know that the exit procedure is more efficient, and so on. And here you see, fast and effective liquidation procedure, avoid trapping assets in unproductive uses. You don't want that. I mean, if a firm is dead, you have to take capital and labor out of that firm and put it somewhere else where it is more productive. So this is the basic idea. It also helps function in the credit markets. How is the insolvency regime in Italy? Again, lags behind. This is the recovery rate whenever there is a failure or a crisis in a firm. It's more than in the other countries. It takes a lot of years, like France, and at high costs. Why is that? It's related probably to the efficiency of the civil justice, which is a problem that we treat in the next slide. You see, in terms of bankruptcy, the length of civil proceedings is very, very high. Okay, so the efficiency of the exit process is low. And this is the efficiency of the civil justice. I mean, you want to have a civil justice that is very efficient because it allows a good enforcement of contract. If you have a good enforcement of contract, obviously, from the point of view of the firm, it's less likely some opportunistic behavior of other firms, clients, and so on, and this reduces the cost and the distortion in firms' decision. Obviously, as I was saying, it contributes to the good functioning of an insolvency regime. So if you take the labor market, civil justice that functions properly reduces the uncertainty over firing costs. If you fire a worker, you don't want to stay, in the tribunal for 10 years. You want to know what is the end of the story. Should I rehire the worker? They give him some money or not? And this is the way of having a more dynamic system. There is empirical evidence showing that the quality of the legal environment affects positively many dimensions. In the case of Italy, for example, firm size. You decide to remain very close to minimize the interaction with workers, for example, that probably brings you to face the civil justice inefficiency. Then, effects on credit. These are two papers on credit for households and credit for firms. Which is both credit, the amount of the quantity of credit is higher where the civil justice works better. Then there is this paper on global value chain participations, and here the idea is that if you want to supply a good to foreign firms, these foreign firms look at where you are located in Italy, and if the tribunal is not, the civil justice is not very efficient, they know that if something goes wrong in the relationship, they have to face the inefficiency of the civil justice. So probably they decide not to use that firm as a supplier. So this is what they show. But talking about the business environment, unfortunately, in the case of Italy, means talking about other dimension. Political connection. Corruption, unfortunately, I mean, we are not ranking high, or probably we are ranking too high along this dimension. Obviously, criminal organization, this is rule of law in general, and the shadow economy, so tax evasion and illegal activities, where again the numbers are against us. I don't want to go through all this. You can, when the paper will be ready, you can see, if you are interested, what these papers are doing. I want just to give you this picture that I really like. This is a work by Cingano and Pinotti. What they said was, what they did was to match the data on political, how can I say, on politician at the local level. They add the identification of the identifier of the politician at the local level. They match this with the identifier of the managers, the owners, and the workers in the firms. Okay, so they know when a firm is politically connected, and they know if this political connection is with the majority party or the minority party. In 1990, we had some election, okay? And so there is a change in the politically connectedness of firms. And there are some firms that get the connection because the party is winning, and other firms that are losing the connection. And this is the evolution of their sales. increasing for politically connected firms, decreasing for politically not connected firms. Obviously, this is just a graph. The paper is very sophisticated, and there are all the possible controls of what's going on. Obviously, the issue is more complicated because in a country like Italy, probably you need some political connection because from a static point of view, you have to overcome regulatory barriers, the time cost I told you before, and so on. But from a dynamic perspective, this is really bad because you are allocating resources in the wrong place. Then tax evasion, and this is another story I'm going to tell you. Another paper I really like by Emanuele Bobbio. He tried to model the effect of tax evasion in a country where the tax rate is very high. It is in a country like Italy. And he imagined that there are heterogeneous firms out there, and one important dimension is that smaller firms are more likely not to be visited by the tax authority. Okay? This probably is an hypothesis that is reasonable for two reasons. The first one is that you live in a world like the Italian one where there are many small firms. So the probability that you are the one that the tax authority go and control is smaller. The other thing is that the tax authority itself has more incentive to go to the larger or medium-large firms, because if you find something wrong, obviously get more money than from the small firm. So this is a reasonable hypothesis. Then what happens in the model? It happens then, if you are a small innovative firms, you would like to grow because you have innovative projects, you have innovative ideas, but at some point you say, okay, look, if I grow, the probability of being caught by the tax authority increases. So there is a disincentive to grow, okay? And so this is a sort of what I call a within firm effect. So there is an incentive to small firms to remain small. These small firms remain small and probably, there is some tax evasion there. If there is that, the larger and medium-large firms know that there is out there some unfair competition. There are small guys that do not pay taxes, so probably they have a cost advantage, and these firms decide, obviously on their own, to reduce their innovation because there is no return from that innovation. If they grow, if they create a new product, they have to share the turnover, the profits with these small innovative firms with tax evasion, not obviously all of them. So this is what happens at the firm level. But obviously you understand that this mechanism in dynamics terms, trigger a negative selection, because at the end of the day you end up with an economy with many small, low productive and low innovative firms with a high scope of tax evasion and a lot of unfair competition. And the medium and large firms, the very innovative firms that decide to stay smaller, what would be optimal because of this unfair competition. Again, some numbers for the people working on numbers, but the model has been calibrated on Italian data. There is a significant impact in terms of GDP growth if tax evasion could disappear in a while. Probably is a too strong assumption. Obviously, this story is very important in a country where the tax rate is high. If the tax rate is high, obviously the advantage that firms have from tax evasion is small, so the mechanism collapses. Okay, so I'm at the last two slides. The first one, I hope I convinced you that when we look at Italy, we are talking about a productive system with clear weaknesses, but some strength. Okay, we are not talking about a system where there is a very weak productive system. There is nothing to say, to work on to improve it. There are part of the system that are very competitive. Obviously, in the within firm, there is this large population of laggards. So the basic idea is to understand how to take some of these firms that are very small and make them medium. Some of them have a potential. I'm not saying that all the small firms are low productive firms. Some of them have a potential. The policymaker should find them or should give them the right incentive to grow and become, as the medium and large firms that are performing very well on the international markets. Obviously, having this polarized system, the second lever is the reallocation. No? Let's try to move resources, capital, and labor from the low productive to the high productive firms. Not easy, but this is the second point. And the third one is that obviously you need to make the system also more efficient on the entry and exit for the reason that I told you during the talk. And this is very important because these are the competitive pressure that in a sense, trigger a positive reaction within the firm as in terms of reallocation. So the very last slide, which is on policy priorities. Obviously, we are talking about a very difficult issue, productivity. Apart from the definition, I think I showed you in this presentation that it's a multidimensional issue. There are many things that affect productivity, and obviously, given that there are many things, it's very difficult also to establish a priority in the reform agenda. So I give you my priority. I mean, the priority of the authors of this paper. Given the the list of topics we went through and what I told you for each topic, I think that the most important problem is here. The efficiency of the public sector, the red tape, the civil justice, this word that related to the public administration. And this is very important not only for the reason I showed you during the presentation, but also because if you try to make structural reforms and the public administration doesn't work, the reforms are not effective. Even if you change the labor market rules, but then the civil justice doesn't improve, the reform of the labor market is less effective. So this is really important. The second is obvious. I mean, in a country where you have criminal organization, corruption, tax evasion, I mean, you have to fight those things. It's kind of obvious things. Let me please apologize me for this, but this is obvious. Then the labor market. I hope I convinced you that we had, a reform of the Italian labor market that we should make assessment of that, but more or less looking at the set of rules. We can say that it's fine, but we need to reform the wage bargaining system and make the active labor market policies effective. This is very difficult because it's related to the constitutional reform, the power of the regions, the power of the state. So it's very complicated, but this is something that must be done. Finance, my take is that if there is something to do is the non-bank part. There is the financial system that is missing in supporting new firms, firm growth and innovation, and obviously the supply of human capital. This is a long run issue, but the education system must be improved. Below the line, I put something, and maybe you want to discuss about that I consider less important. It is true that manufacturing reacted thanks to competition, but if I look at what is left in terms of too restrictive regulation in services, I mean, there is something relevant in local public service and professional service, the debate on the taxi drivers in Rome or in Milan. Yeah, I think it's very important, but the question is how important is for the aggregate. So it means we have to talk about that, but I'm not sure that if we start from here, we get significant effects in terms of aggregate growth. The banking system, this is something that needs to be studied probably better, especially now that we are out of the crisis. During the crisis, I showed you that the zombie lending was not that very important, but still the Gopinath argument before the crisis and probably now after the crisis could still be there. So we need to understand how the Italian banks allocate credit across firms. Then the so-called industrial policy, innovation policy, I don't want to bother you too much, but the Italian, since 2011, we changed a lot. Now the R&D tax credit, the patent box, support to the financing of startup. Many things have been done. We should, stay there, look at the data, and try to understand if they work. I don't have a final assessment on that. And then firm governance and management. What to do? I don't know if you have idea. Pellegrino and Zingales claim that this loyalty-based management is the endogenous result of the fact that firms face a lot of financial and bureaucratic constraints. So you use your relationship, your personal relationship to overcome, the constraints in the system, in the credit markets and the bureaucracy. It's an interesting story, but there could be something else, and there could be something that is cultural. So that's going to be a problem for policy making. But I have nothing to add on that. I think I'm done. Thank you. Okay, how does it work? Yeah. Should I say there are questions? There are questions? Yeah.
Thank you. Great presentation.
Thank you.
Could you go back to the slide right before? And can I ask you out of these items, which are, in your view, the three most important affecting, let's call it, a change to American, or let's call it EU standards?
I made a big effort to cut down this, and now you ask me to.
I have my own thoughts on it, and
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
one of your slides before,
Okay.
which focused on the banking system,
Okay.
I would think that that's one of the top three.
But which dimension of that? The credit, I mean, you mean the banking system and the allocation, this story?
That's right. Because I think when you showed a slide of about 2 years ago, and you showed a reduction, it was 30 slides prior, I think we showed a reduction in productivity, which matched up to reduction in problems in the banking system.
Yeah, I mean, as I said at the end, I probably was too, I made a too strong statement that if the banking system is not top of the list, at least, I mean, according to the analysis we made, is not as important as appears to be important in the debate, okay? Because typically, I mean, the zombie lending story and so on. As I said at the end, probably, I mean, you are right. Probably the banking system is important, but first I would like to see some, as I was saying, as I was writing here, I would like to see some analysis. I would like to really understand. Now we are looking at the bank, we are looking at the, following the Gopinath story about the fact that before the crisis, credit went to the wrong places. We have started looking at the distribution of credit across sectors. Is it true, like in Spain, that it goes to something like construction? And I don't know the results, and my colleagues are working there, but this is, I guess, is the first step. Then we need more structure on this reasoning, and probably the point is more sophisticated and more difficult, which is probably the banking system is not working that bad, but should work much better to face, to help the Italian economy to face other shocks. I mean, the Italian economy is hit continuously by, as all economies, but the Italian economy has been hit by strong shocks. Again, think of China, no? Stuff like that. So probably the banking system is an important player in that, the one that swiftly moves resources in the proper way. Okay? Probably it move resources in the proper way, but not fast enough. That could be an issue. But I mean, yeah.
Your point, the last supply of human capital education system, and I know you had the percentages compared to other countries. Anecdotally, there are so many members in my family who are overeducated, who cannot find jobs anywhere in Italy, and that's why they come to the US. That's why they go to London, maybe now not London, Frankfurt. I'm not so sure that piece is, when you look at it on a broad scale, I think the export of educated Italians across the world is almost a diaspora currently.
Yeah, as I was saying before, there are demand and supply effects, and the only paper I know says that both are important. It concludes that the supply part is probably more important than the demand part, but what the paper does, probably I was too fast, but what the paper does is to say, that, which could be the problem of part of your family is the matching. Okay, so the matching between supply and demand. So there is low demand by firms that are small, not productive, low skill sectors and so on. But then even if there are firms that are high productive in the right sector and so on, it's very difficult to match firms and workers because of the active labor market policies not working and so on. Yeah, third question. Okay.
Third question.
Okay.
There's for anyone interested in this topic, there was a film probably about 3 years ago by Michael Moore. It's called Where Do We Invade Next? I don't know if anyone here in the audience has seen it.
Yeah.
Fascinating film. The first one focuses on an Italian company, Lardini, and they're somewhere near Bologna in that neighborhood. And they, to me, they show some of the problems that you highlighted, but some of the thought, the realization that made in Italy, the high quality aspect, if a company focuses on that, even with all of these other problems, they can do very well and make a very, very good product in demand worldwide. And I think it's sort of the role model, which I think might match up to some of the points you brought up here.
Okay. So
Just very big. So when I go to Italy, so there is a friend of mine that is a CFO of one of these medium companies that is export oriented, right? So they produce machinery for aluminum, and so he tells me about the story that they go to sell machinery in Iran, and it's always them and a German competitor. Right? So when he said, when we lose on financing, because in developing markets they want like 100% financing essentially on the machine. We sell the machine and the service with that. So where we lose is on the financing, because the banks we work with, they provide worse terms than the German banks. So then I tell him, so why don't you go to the German bank? Right? And then he looks at me like, I'm coming from outer space. Well, what do you mean the German bank? We are in Italy, we don't go to the German bank. So the question is, so years back, right, so we made a big fuss of the integration of the banking market in Europe, and more in general, expected of financial intermediation. And is there any sign that, in fact, integration goes to the extent that, like my friend can actually go and use a German bank rather than a Italian? Or it has to do with or what I was convinced is that the German bank doesn't lend to them, because if they get in trouble, then they go to Italian court.
That could be nice. And the other point is that probably is not the case of your friend, but the typical Italian firms is not very transparent from a financial point of view. So, I mean, the fact that the banking system is based on the personal relationship means that if you go to a German bank, I mean, there is no personal relationship from the past. The relationship lending, no? The story of relationship lending. So that could be another problem. The other coin, I mean, the other side of the coin of your story is the internationalization of the Italian bank. I didn't talk about that, but obviously, if you have very internationalized banks that are, you know, able to operate in Iran, so your friend has no need to go to German banks. I mean, the Italian banks should do better. So there are a mix of the two things. In terms of the segmentation of the market, I don't know much. I think it's something that we should look at. Yeah. Okay. Down there. Okay. It was the first. Okay. For you.
I was just in Italy 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks in Southern Italy, and I had this odd thing. Everybody in Italy has a mobile phone. Okay. Yeah. Because of that, there's nobody printing schedules in the railroad stations. There's no tourist information places anymore. Is technology, to some degree, right now anyway, taking away jobs in Italy?
Okay, that's a very good question. This is, I know, it's a debate on the polarization of induced by technologies across the world. We look at the data in Italy. There isn't much evidence of that. The polarization is the following thing: that the technology we have in our pockets and so on, what they do is to preserve the work of very high-skilled people and very low-skilled people, the manual workers. Instead of looking at skill, let's look at tasks. Cognitive tasks and manual tasks are not, negatively hit by technologies. The medium, the routine tasks are those suffering. In the US, this is a very strong debate, as far as I know, very hot debate. In Italy, when we look at the numbers, this polarization is not there. Why is that? Could it be that technology? I mean, we all have the mobile phone. Actually, we have 2 mobile phones in Italy. I'm not the only one. I'm saying that. But the use of technology and the diffusion of technology in the productive system is not as high as here. So we have still, low technology firms and so on. So obviously many things that we do with the iPhone, we do it like in the US, but the system, the technology is not there. It's not a real revolution as it is here. And I see it, I mean, at Uber. There is no Uber in Rome, just to give you an example, because the taxi driver fought against Uber and they won. Okay. So that's, I don't know if I answer, but the basic idea is that we don't see the effect on the labor market, and my guess is that because technology is not so widespread. Yeah. Okay.
Could you talk about missing institutions in Italy and whether they're going to be part of your reform package? For instance, does Italy have a venture capital system? Does Italy have technology transferring institutes or innovation institutes like Fraunhofer institutes in Germany? Is that part of the problem solution story?
I fully agree with you. The venture capital is missing, and the technology transfer is missing. I mean, in my slide on the industrial policy and so on, there was this, this statement hidden here. Obviously, if you want to talk about industrial policy and innovation, Germany, I mean, for Italian, Germany is a sort of nightmare. Whenever I have to assess my country, I look at Germany and say, okay, Germany is better than Italy. And Germany has this system of, research centers really connected to firms and so on that works apparently very well. We have nothing of that. Why is that? Again, I'm sorry, I'm an economist. There is never an economist has never an answer. I mean, there is always on one side, on one end, on the other. And so on one end, the universities are not that good, or the research centers are not there. On the other end, the firms are not there. I mean, if you want to have a very profitable, if you want to, set up a research center and have very profitable connection with firms, you need medium and large firms, right? At least you want to sit on the table with a guy that has at least 1,000 employees, not 2 employees, right? So it's not clear, but definitely I agree with you, that is a problem. The other one is venture capital, but I go back to Gianluca's statement. Okay, there is no venture capital. Okay, fine, but if there are good ideas, why foreign venture capitalists don't come to Italy? Apparently they come, and they take the man and the idea, they bring it to Stanford. So they come. But they don't stay there. This is just an anecdotal evidence. I have no idea about that. But the system, the venture capital, all the chain, I mean, the business angels and so on, is not developed. That happened in Israel, in the US, back in time, and the policy is public policy. I mean, you enter and you subsidize the system, okay? Why don't we do that? I don't know, fiscal problem? I don't know. There is no fiscal space? Or we are not able? I don't know either. It's a very good point.
Yes, you mentioned that usually the family-owned firms are less efficient, especially when the CEO is a family member, right, in terms of productivity. And you also mentioned that the small firms are more likely to go through tax evasion than the larger one. Now, is it fair to say that the smaller firms and the family-owned, we are talking about the same group of firms? Is there a confounding factor there?
Yes. Yeah, in the sense that in my analytical approach, I take the smaller firms as the variable that explain to me many things, and now I'm trying to step back and to understand why the firms are small. Okay? And so the tax evasion story is one story. The other story is that I want to remain close to within the family. Cultural reasons, tax evasion again. I'm not able to manage more than 2 people, 3 people, no? Because there could be a lack of management skills. It could be that. And so the way I see the management story, the family management story, is try to find an explanation for firms being small. In that sense, I agree with you. They are strictly connected.
Just a question on the service sector. So you mentioned that the manufacturing sector has improved productivity, but the service sector did not. But at the same time, it seems that there's been a number of reforms that have improved regulation on that front. So my question is, what do you see as a possible driver of greater efficiency in the service sector? And I add to this something that was told to me, when I asked the same question to others. They said that possibly the manufacturing sector
is increasingly becoming aware that they have to sell goods with services such as financing and the other things that Gianluca was mentioning. So somebody saw that actually the thriving productive sector, manufacturing sector, might lead an improvement in services efficiency. So I wonder whether on these two questions you may have some additional evidence.
I mean, on the first one, I think is an open question. The only answer I have is that all the restrictive things, all the list of bad things I showed to you, probably they are more relevant for a firm which is less exposed to competitive pressure. I mean, if you are a manufacturing firm from my area, from Bologna, so a mechanical firm, very productive, that has to sell machinery, everywhere, they have to find a way to overcome those barriers, and they have to fight for that. They have to find a way. The service sector, probably, the service firm can remain, inefficient and thrive because there is no pressure. So probably tax evasion and so on. But I understand it's not the real answer. I mean, that's the point, because one of my conclusion, this conclusion is, I don't believe that there is much to do on the service sector, but as you are saying, I showed at the beginning a picture saying the service sector is the problem. So probably all these things are more relevant for the service sector than for the manufacturing sector. For some reason we should study. So it's a point that I take, but I don't answer. On the manufacturing and services, it's true that many manufacturing firms are, realize that services are important. Is this an obstacle to their competitiveness because the services they buy on the market are inefficient, or is the driver of a change in the service sector? We'll see. Yeah.
First of all, my compliments, very interesting presentation, not auto-referential, which is an exception, I think, more and more. 2 points. You show a slide whereby Italy and Germany were very close in family-owned businesses, CEO coming from the family, but then Germany is very good instead in allowing management which does not come from the family. If you have any evidence of how this happens, if maybe there are regulations or certain laws that favor this. And the other question, maybe it's difficult, but just your opinion. How did we get to this point? Why Italy arrived to this point of low competitiveness compared to the other nations? I'm old enough to remember that when I started working, it was not this way. I was working for a bank. I still work for a bank. I was working for BCI, Banca Commerciale Italiana, which was one of the most international banks in Italy and probably Europe. So the attention towards international activity was very high. So I don't know if it's clear. I would like to understand your opinion on how we got here.
Yeah, I'm not an economic historian. It happened to me to work with an economic historian, and his point is that if you look at the history of the productive sector of this country, after the Second World War, you had a lot of big firms, mostly related to the state, being directly state firms or working for the state, having money from the state, or producing goods and services for the state. Then there was a breakup of this in the 60s, and in the 70s we woke up with a lot of small firms. So the system and the structure you saw there since the 70s. So, but in the 70s and the 80s, leaving aside fiscal policy, leaving aside the debt is there because in the 80s, government spent a lot of money, so growth in those years could be related to fiscal policy. But in the 70s and the 80s, that system was not bad. I mean, we had all the literature on the industrial districts. I mean, our firms were very small, but they localized close to each other in industrial districts, and in this industrial district, was in a sense the substitute to the big size. Instead of being larger in size as a single firm, it was larger, no? Within the industrial district was larger. The piastrelle in Sassuolo, no? They work all together, and so they can serve a market outside. Then this system collapsed. Why is that? The story, but I have no way to prove it. The story I tend to believe in is that the shocks that hit the Italian economy, or better, all the economies, the European economies, that were the euro, or the European integration, the globalization, China, and the technology, the way of changing and producing, these shocks are shocks that hit all the economies, as I said, but to which small firms are less capable of reacting. They weren't able to react. Small firms or family firms or whatever is the reason behind. But we didn't see a reaction by most of the Italian productive system. Why do I say the euro? The euro means the end of competitive devaluation. I mean, the Italian firms were used to regain competitiveness because sooner or later there was a depreciation of the lira. So at that point, your goods cost less, and you can sell again. The euro comes, no way to do that. The euro is a stable currency, it's a strong currency, and so on. These firms were not able to change, not to make a step forward, and to change the structure of the firm for many of the reasons we cited here. I don't know which one is more important. I tried to give you some priorities, but more or less this is the story. In the manufacturing sector, because the pressure were really strong, the China shock is huge for Italy. In the manufacturing sector, there was a reaction, indeed, and indeed we see the results. Okay, but the manufacturing sector is 20% of our economy. The manufacturing firms, I don't remember, I don't remember the number, but something like 500,000 out of 4 million firms. So we are talking about small part of the system. Your first question is, in a sense, I don't know the answer, is related. No, the family thing. I mean, if you believe the Pellegrini and Zingale stories, this is something that comes from the inefficiency of the public sector, comes from something, again, back in the decades, and probably that was the reaction of people close into the family. But it could simply be that, we are, our culture is family-centered, that you want to keep this thing within the family, and again, you realize with some delay that you have to change, this management structure to react properly to the shock. That is my story, but I cannot prove it. So there was a question. Yeah.
As an American consumer, I noticed that just about every contained liquid that I buy is Pellegrino. How did they do that? I remember my youth it was Perrier. How did they do that?
They did, because it's not Italian. It's not Italian anymore. It's not Italian. Yeah, it's not Italian anymore, but still, let's assume it is Italian, because there are other examples you can make. I mean, it's a system with a lot of excellent, very competitive firms, right? If you go to Italy and look at what you find in terms of producer of foods, I mean, those are Italians. If you go, machinery, the machinery sector is excellent. And we are, because there are competencies, there are skills. It's a system, is a country with a long history of production. I hope there is no Greek here, but Italy is not Greece. When there was the Greek crisis, the debate within Europe is, okay, now we should raise taxation. We should do taxation on what? No, there is not real production you can work on and you can build on. Italy is different. Yeah. Sorry, Luigi, behind you. Yeah.
Thank you very much for a very interesting presentation, which is based largely on research papers. In addition to these studies, there are a number of surveys, international surveys. For example, Transparency International does a series of rankings, and Doing Business by the World Bank. And just a few days ago, the World Economic Forum put out the usual global competitiveness report, and Italy only moved up one slot to 43 out of 130
real data, hard data. I prefer to look at the hard data and try to understand the phenomenon looking at hard data. Those are opinions. I'm not saying that opinions are not important. You know, in some cases, these surveys are based on the opinions of managers of big firms. And obviously there, I believe that they have a real sense of what's going on. In other cases, just opinion of people. So if you read a newspaper and you say, okay, Italy, there is the corruption, the mafia, and so on, and then you say, okay, Las Palmas is really bad. And so I don't know. I guess that these surveys, you know, depict what the country is. I don't know about the ranking. I don't know if it's correct that Italy is 142, and I don't know which country is 141. I have no idea about that. I prefer an approach in which I look at the real data. I try to compare what is missing in all this research agenda, which is something that we are trying, the Bank of Italy, you know, to do in the next years, are international comparisons. In the sense that most of the research I presented here is what the economists call applied micro research. So we look at firms, no? We look at the behavior of single agents instead of comparing countries on aggregated. Okay? I like looking at the mechanisms, looking at the players. But when I do that, I can only do it with Italian firms because I don't have that data, comparable data for German firms, French firms, and so on. No? So whenever I make an assessment, it's an assessment in a closed system. So I can say there is something that is not working here, but I have no idea if probably it's working worse in France or is working better in Germany. I would like to understand why, and I cannot do that. So I think that this is an effort that the economists should do, and this implies some collaboration by the statisticians. So it's a complex thing. But at least in Europe, where there is, you know, Eurostat, so there are agencies, statistical agencies that are in charge to collect harmonized data. We should try to do that.
Yeah, no, I thought at the beginning of your presentation, you laid the case for basically consolidating the micro enterprises, because let's not forget we have more than 3.5 million micro enterprises which employ from 1 to 10, and I believe the vast majority is actually in the lower end of that spectrum. So my question is, the micro enterprises basically they have typically, as you said before, low productivity. They don't employ many people. They use resources of the system. So they really create have an impact that is not necessarily good on the system overall. So my question to you is why is it not on your priorities the fact to give incentives or disincentives to companies to aggregate and to form bigger firms?
That's a good question. I mean, let's say the incentives. I don't think there are incentives. I mean, if you consolidate, tax incentives. I mean, Italy tried many times tax incentives for consolidation in the banking system in the firms. They never work. But I like the second part of your statement, disincentive. I would like to remove the incentives to remain small, or to give disincentives to remain small. Okay? For example, tax evasion is one of those. Or again, the labor market regulation, when we had the threshold, the Article 18 at 15 employees. No? There is no evidence that the Article 18, that was the article related to the rules for dismissal of workers that were stricter for firms with more than 15 employees and looser for firms below 15 employees. So there are many colleagues and economists that try to look at what happened at the threshold. And not much evidence, and you would expect, a lot of firms are 14. They stop there and say, okay, I don't go to 16 because if I go to 16, the world changes. Not true, but things like that, can be very important. Whenever I guess in the US there is the Small Business Act, right? The Small Business Act, all the rules that should help small businesses. I fully agree this is important, but not in a country like Italy. The Small Business Act is something that you should design properly to allow small firms to grow, but not to allow small firms to remain small because it's going to be convenient to remain small. Okay? So I take your second point. There are many things here that could increase the incentives to grow. Even finance. You know, I give you money if you grow. I don't give you money if you want to remain, no, small. Labor market, I told you, the red tape, stuff like, there are many things.
Yeah, but from a policy perspective, it's more difficult to convince the system to give more finance to, so, you know, in the eyes of a legislator, like, can give incentives, for example, like, making the taxation of R&D if you are, if you have a certain size, and as you said before, like increasing the number of audits to small enterprises, so there's no incentive to remain small, as you said before also. So, there are ways, I think in policy to create incentives or disincentives.
I agree.
I see like the same way, like, way to convince, small firms to aggregate and to become more like in line with, like a G8
I agree,
type of
and
economy.
often the devil is into the details. You mentioned the R&D tax credit for fiscal reason, I mean fiscal space, for having a low impact on the finances, the public finances. The R&D tax credit has been designed the following way. You get a tax credit on the amount of investment of R&D expenditure you make on the top of your 3-year average, past 3-year average, okay? This is because I don't want to give a tax credit on all the R&D tax expenditure you do, because if I take fiat, obviously it's going to be a lot of money, no? So I will give you the tax credit only if you increase your R&D expenditure. What does that mean? You are favoring those that are very small, they never made that R&D, and they start from zero, so a positive number is fine, and they get the tax credit. Otherwise, fiat should say, okay, I made 2 million of investment, I have to make 3 million. Come on, maybe 2 million is the best thing, the optimal thing to be. So, I agree with you. There are many things like this.
I don't have a silver bullet, but I'm just saying in terms of like objectives, like and priorities, like if it's not a priority, and I don't, to be honest, in the Italian political debate, I never hear anybody, because it's a huge constituency, as we know.
I know you want to bring me to say the following things. These are 12 million votes, okay? 3.5 million, 3.5 million people, firms, by 2 family members, by 3, and these are votes. Sorry. Yes.
My second question. It seems like my wife is 4 grandparents, or maybe that's why we visited, but it seems like the elephant in the room is something you didn't touch on. The dynamics between the North and the South.
Yeah. That's a very good point. You are right. Obviously, there is something here. Even if it was true probably years ago, and now we read on the newspaper that the criminal organization is in Milan. And then most of the problems, probably also the family issue is more important in the south than in the north. Why? Trust problems. If you live in a system where trust is lower when you get out of your house or your family, then you tend to be closer into the family. No? Why is trust low? Okay, this is you take me to some sociological debate that I don't want to get into. But yes, no, you are totally right. The example we all made here in terms of firms are always positive firms. I mean, positive examples are always about firms in the north. Unfortunately. But there are some realities around Naples, around Bari, Puglia, that are very, very efficient and productive, but obviously there is no mass there.